And I want to thank everybody for being here. We are recording this session. We won't record the Q&A. And I want to thank Sofia, our excellent dietitian, for bringing this month's program and last month's program and next month's program. This is going to be an ongoing series because it's been so popular. So I'm going to say no further words except thank you, Sofia, and then I'm going to mute myself and shut off my screen. But I will be here to listen for the next few minutes.
All right. Okay, so I will also start off by thanking you all for attending today. It's awesome to be doing this for the second time, and hopefully we'll keep it up and keep having, participation. And I really appreciate having this interaction with you. Soon enough it will be in person, so that will be nice. And as a forewarning, so we are talking about fiber today. I am going to get into digestion a little bit, so I'm giving you a little warning if you're squeamish. We are going to talk about some of the bodily movement, but it's not going to get too detailed. So if you would not like to hear that, please feel free to not listen or excuse yourself, and I'll try and give you a little bit of warning if I'm going to discuss some of those things. But I think it's an important part of nutrition. It's something that I pay attention to when I'm seeing residents, just to make sure that, with all of the good food that we're putting into our body, we want to make sure that our body's processing it correctly. So it's one of those things that it happens. We all use the bathroom. So all right, with that, I will share my screen and I will bring up my presentation. Let's see. Okay, and go, I'll play that. All right, can everyone see my screen okay? Yeah, okay, great. I'll put this down here because I realized last time I didn't put that enough to the side, and I think it was covering a little bit of the information, so I apologize about that, but here we go. So today we're going to talk about fiber, kind of the basics of fiber, introduction. Some of the things I would like to talk about today are, what exactly is fiber? We hear that word thrown around a lot, and I think we have some common misconceptions that are shared widely. We're not exactly sure what it is, what are the best sources from it. So I want to touch on that a little bit, as well as giving you some examples of where we can find it within our diet. We hear the recommendations that we should be increasing the amount in our diet and having fiber throughout the day. But we don't always have a good idea of where we can get that, and it can seem daunting sometimes if we're being told to increase something, but we don't know the best sources. So then I want to talk about why we should increase the fiber in our diet. Why is it good for us? Why should we want to be incorporating it? And what are the benefits and the properties that are to be gained from that? So to start with some of the basics, fiber is a carbohydrate. So if any of you were able to attend my previous session, or if you were able to watch the recording, I kind of described the My Plate. And that is the current presentation of my pyramid. So My Plate kind of gives you the idea of what you want your meals to look like to be balanced. So if you were to visualize a plate and you have half of your plate be vegetables, you can have some fruits in there, but mostly vegetables. A quarter of your plate, you want to aim for a quality protein, and a quarter of the plate is going to be grains or starches. And oftentimes that's what we think of as carbohydrate. However, there are carbohydrates that also come from fruits and vegetables. And so when we think of fiber, it can come from fruits, it can come from vegetables, and it can come from those grains and starches as well. So a few things about fiber. It may help lower your blood cholesterol. So that's one of those common things that is encouraged with fiber, to help lower your blood cholesterol. And I'll get into a little bit of that. It can also promote blood sugar control. So those are the two big benefits that are widely expressed when we're talking about trying to increase our fiber intake. And with that, we're gonna look into what foods are naturally high in fiber. I think we have a lot of supplements that are out there, like Metamucil and things like that, that are, you know, presented to us as being the prescription to increase our fiber. And that's a totally acceptable and great way to get in your fiber. But I also want to kind of emphasize that there are so many foods in our diet on a daily basis that contain that fiber. And so it's very easy for us to identify those, pick them out, and try and increase our intake through natural whole foods. That's not to say there is anything wrong with using more of the prescription sources, but I kind of want to elucidate that we don't always have to go to that as a first thing. We can certainly incorporate that as needed, and especially if your doctor, your physician is recommending those things as important for you, we can definitely include that. Okay, so to the basics. Fiber is a carbohydrate, as I said, and the sources are wide. Fruits, vegetables, legumes, so beans and grains all contain good sources of fiber. And when we think of fiber, it creates bulk in our intestines. So when we are consuming a meal and we start the breakdown process, we start breaking down that food when we chew it with our teeth. So the first stage of digestion actually occurs with our teeth. And that's when we start to release some enzymes that will start to break down the food in our mouth. And as we swallow and it moves through our body, it continues to break down further and further. So after it passes from our stomach and it gets to our intestines, that's when we see fiber really come into play. So in our stomach, that gives us that sensation of fullness, but digestion doesn't stop there. So it continues to go through the intestines and then all the way until you go to the bathroom. So in the intestines, the fiber creates that bulk, and it has two different effects with that. So one of the effects with creating bulk is that it can either speed up the processing time, so make the foods that we eat go through us faster. It can also slow down the processing time and make the foods that we eat go through our body slower. So two different effects and two different types of fiber. So if we're thinking about fiber as a carbohydrate, it is a little bit different. Oftentimes we think about carbohydrates as breads or fruit or vegetables. And those are all breads and fruit and vegetable carbohydrates. That's exactly right. But fiber, being a carbohydrate, is a type of carbohydrate that our body cannot digest. So when we are eating foods and we're breaking down carbohydrates, or we're breaking down protein, or breaking down fat, the process of digestion, we take big long molecules and we break them down into smaller and smaller pieces. When we have fiber, that can be a long molecule, but our body can't really break it down. And so that's where that idea of bulk comes into play. So while most carbohydrates, whether it's a bread or a fruit or a vegetable, is broken down into a smaller sugar molecule, with glucose being that really, really simple sugar molecule, fiber can't be broken down the same way. So with that, it passes through our body undigested. Now I'll go into the two types of fiber and kind of explain how they have those different effects on our body, where one speeds up the process of digestion and one slows down the process. So soluble fiber gets its name because of its solubility, or the property that it can be dissolved in water. So if we think about salt or sugar being dissolved or mixed into warm water, if you mix it and keep stirring it, it'll eventually dissolve into the water. With soluble fiber, that is the type of fiber that has been studied and shown to help lower glucose levels or blood sugar levels and help lower blood cholesterol levels. So those are those health benefits that we hear of quite often. That's from the soluble type of fiber. Some examples of the soluble type of fiber are oatmeal, nuts, beans, lentils, apples, and blueberries. So if we're thinking about soluble fiber, that's the type of fiber that is going to slow down how quickly our body moves food through. So this is the warning that we're going to talk a little bit about some digestive properties. So for example, if someone is experiencing diarrhea, the soluble fiber is one that is often recommended that you want to increase. So you might be recommended to follow foods on the BRAT diet, if you've ever heard of that. It's bananas, rice, applesauce, and toast. And those foods are recommended, one, because they're pretty bland, and so it's a little bit less shocking on your system if your body's, if your stomach is a little bit upset, you want some blander foods to help settle the stomach. Those foods also contain soluble fiber, which slows down how quickly your body is processing food. So kind of has the opposite effect to reverse that diarrhea. That's typically why you would see the recommendations for foods that fall within the BRAT diet. Insoluble fiber is the second type of fiber, and it gets its name because it does not dissolve in water. So we had our soluble fiber, the sugar, the salt dissolving into the water. Insoluble fiber would be like the oil and vinegar. It does not dissolve. This is the fiber that has the opposite effect. So it helps food move more quickly through your digestive system. That is effective if you are experiencing constipation or your bowel movements are a little bit backed up or irregular. If you incorporate more of the insoluble fiber foods, that can help move things along and promote more regular bowel movements. And food examples of that would be wheat or whole wheat bread, whole grain couscous, brown rice, legumes, carrots, cucumbers, and tomatoes. And these are just a few examples. Another thing that you'll notice is a lot of these fiber containing foods contain both the soluble and the insoluble fiber. They might have different amounts of each, but a lot of them will contain both types. So a few easy ways to increase this thing that everyone is saying is so good and is important in our diet and that we should be eating more and more of. So how do we do that? Well, it's not as difficult as it may seem, and it shouldn't be as overwhelming a task. I think oftentimes when we hear about these things that are good for us, that are healthy, it can seem overwhelming and it can be pretty daunting. And my whole premise here is to inform and educate you all on these things that should be not overwhelming. And my purpose is to show you that there are these easy ways to do these things that I'm saying are good for you. So a few easy ways to increase the fiber in your diet. One is focusing on the whole food. So eating whole fruit. If we compare a whole apple to applesauce to apple juice, that processing, by the time we get to the apple juice, there's probably zero fiber in that apple juice, unless fiber is added back into it. With applesauce, we still have some fiber in there, not as much because typically we don't have the peel, right? It's usually just the fruit or the meat inside of the apple that's pureed down to applesauce. But when we have the whole apple, that peel around the outside plus the meat underneath the peel, that gives us the most amount of fiber. So if we think about most fruits and veggies, if we're eating the skin or the peel, that gives us a good amount of fiber. The vegetable or the fruit, in addition to that or underneath that, still has some fiber, but if we eat the whole thing, we get the most amount of fiber. So, the peel on an apple, the skin on a potato, those kinds of things will have that extra bit of fiber. Another good and easy way to increase the fiber is looking at whole grain products and brown rices versus refined grains. If we think of refined grains, we're typically referring to white breads or white rices, white pastas. With that processing, the refining process, we're removing the part of the grain that contains that fiber. So if we look at whole grain products, we're making sure to incorporate the part of the grain that has that fiber, and therefore we get that fiber benefit. So if we look on labels on a breakfast cereal, for example, if the first ingredient in the ingredients list on the breakfast cereal is whole grain, we can be sure that that's a whole grain product. And that can be on any kind of label. If you're looking at a bread label or crackers, the first ingredient, if it's whole grain, that's an excellent source of whole grain and an excellent source of fiber. We can also vary the kinds of snacks that we're incorporating. So, you know, I personally like to snack on potato chips every once in a while, but I know that there's not a whole lot of fiber in there. If you get, you know, the kettle chips with the skin on, they might have a little bit more, but if we're switching up our snacks to maybe snack on some raw veggies, there's definitely some good fiber in there. And so mixing up our snacks or even incorporating more of those veggies and whole grains into our main meals, that's an easy way to get some extra fiber in. And finally, I like to recommend substituting beans or legumes for meat 2 or 3 times a week. So we talked on my last presentation a lot about how plant-based eating is kind of becoming more and more popular, not only because we're reducing the amount of red meat specifically in our diet, but because it's giving us all of that natural vitamin and mineral sources from the veggies. And if we're looking for quality protein, still wanting to reduce the amount of meat, adding in the beans or legumes gives us fiber. It also gives us some good protein. And it doesn't have to be every day that you go meatless, but having, you know, a meatless Monday is becoming a more popular thing. A few times a week, if you can have some plant-based meals, that can be a really healthy change. All right, so we move into fiber and disease. I talked a little bit about the way that soluble fiber has been shown to benefit those with heart disease or with diabetes. And so I'll kind of touch on that a little bit more. The studies have been looked into saying fiber may reduce the risk of developing various conditions. That includes heart disease, diabetes, diverticular disease, which is to do with the intestines, and constipation, which also has to do with our digestion. As far as diabetes goes, if we think about fiber, we talked a little bit about fiber adding bulk. So if we're eating a mixed meal, and I like to think of a mixed meal as following that my plate. So my plate, we want to incorporate protein, we want to incorporate some starch, we want to incorporate some veggies. If we're consuming a mixed meal, it's going to take our body more time and more thinking to break down all of those different components, as opposed to just having one component that our body has to break down. So if we're consuming a mixed meal, there's fiber from the starch or the grain, there's fiber from the vegetable, and while we're also trying to break down that protein, the fiber that's in that meal will slow down how quickly we break everything down. The reason why that has been shown to be effective for people with diabetes is that it can help control the blood sugar, especially after we have a meal. So a good example is if we drink a glass of juice. That's pretty much simple carbohydrate, as we like to call it. And our body is really good about taking that simple carbohydrate and putting it out into our blood very fast. That gives us immediate energy because that blood sugar is going straight into our blood system. but that's used up really quickly because we don't have to do much to break it down or to digest it. If we're consuming a mixed meal, our body's working much harder to break everything down, and that release of the blood sugar into our bloodstream is much slower. So instead of our blood sugar shooting up after we have a meal, it will be a much gradual rise and hopefully not a huge significant dip. And I like to think about this not only for people with diabetes, but for any kind of goal to stabilize your blood sugar. If you want sustained energy throughout the day, you also don't want crazy blood sugar spikes. So it's a good idea to aim for that mixed meal, incorporating all of the different food groups if you can, and especially getting some fiber in. With heart disease, fiber may help prevent heart disease by helping reduce the cholesterol in our blood. So the soluble fiber is the fiber type that has been shown to help reduce cholesterol. And the way that this does it is soluble fiber kind of attaches or latches on to bile, which is a byproduct, and that contains bits of the bad cholesterol, as we'll call it. And instead of the bad cholesterol getting out into our bloodstream, the soluble fiber grasps onto it and goes through our digestive system, and we excrete it instead of absorbing it. So that is a good way to help lower the bad cholesterol from getting into our bloodstream. And in regards to weight management, with fiber kind of slowing down the passage of food through our digestive tract, because it slows down how quickly our body breaks apart the different foods in that mixed meal, it can make us feel fuller longer. It doesn't necessarily give us a false sense of fullness because we're still getting great nutrients in our body, but it helps us feel satiated. So that longer feeling of fullness, we're not reaching for the next bag of potato chips. We had a balanced mixed meal, we're getting our fiber, we have the vitamins and nutrients. So our body might be monitoring itself much more naturally. And weight management, everybody has their own set point. But with those kinds of cues, we will fall into our healthy weight naturally. It's not going to require a restriction of a certain thing. We'll be able to find that stable, steady place, feeling full, feeling satiated, and maintaining that energy. Additionally, a lot of foods that are naturally high in fiber are also lower in calories. So our body doesn't use fiber for energy necessarily, even though it is a carbohydrate. We use other simple sugars for energy, and we use fats for energy. But the fiber, it doesn't really give us the energy that our body wants. It helps move things through our body, and that's its purpose, really. So if we're thinking about how much we need in a day, it's generally recommended that women aim for around 25 grams of fiber per day and around 38 grams of fiber per day for men. However, we're all different shapes and sizes. We all have different levels of activity. So that's a big generalization. If you want to think more about your intake, you can aim for around 14 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories a day. So when all of the nutrition labels that you see in the store come out, they say based on a 2,000 calorie per day diet. So that's kind of the general calorie allotment. But everyone eats differently. Some people eat more, some people eat less. We all have different activity levels, and so that all comes into play. But that's kind of a good rule of thumb if you're trying to get a sense of how to make it more personalized. And recommendations for incorporating or increasing fiber into your diet, definitely do it slowly, especially if you are not eating a ton of fiber already, if you shoot up the amount of fiber, that's probably going to be a little bit of a shock to your system. So you want to give your body time to adjust. You can be eating a lot of fiber already, but if you're not drinking enough water, the fiber isn't going to work as effectively. So as you incorporate or increase fiber, also make sure you're drinking plenty of water along with that. And that kind of goes back to the soluble and insoluble fiber. So water is required for that, and we need to make sure that with all of the fiber, we're giving it something to move through our body with. And finally, I think a good rule of thumb is to spread it out. So spread out the fiber that you're eating throughout your day. Incorporate it with all of your meals if you can. I think if we try and load up all of our fiber into one meal, that's not going to sit really well in our stomach. So if we spread it out throughout our day, that's keeping our body's digestive system working throughout the day as well. And it will be less of a shock to our system if we have bits and pieces. And that way it's a little bit easier. I think it's not as daunting because you can say, oh, you know, I had a whole grain English muffin with some peanut butter and some fruit for breakfast. That's already a good amount of fiber. For lunch, if you have a salad or if you incorporate some veggies, there's some more fiber. Same thing with dinner. If you have veggies or a salad or a side of fruit or some beans, that way you're getting that fiber throughout the day. Your body can continue to work to that and adjust to that, and it will add up quickly. You'll be surprised if you look into, you know, a little bit goes a long way, as they would say. And not every amount of fruit or vegetable or whole grain contains a ton of fiber, but 4 grams here and 4 grams there, that will add up very fast. And I think wherever you're at right now, if you're eating a good amount of fiber throughout the day, if you're not eating a ton of fiber and you want to increase it, it's very easy to slowly incorporate that and to adopt that. There we go. Oh, okay, so that's all I have for that presentation. These are the resources that I use. And again, if you ever want access to those resources or additional resources, I am happy to share those. I get a lot of my references from eatright.org, which is the website of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And they have wonderful handouts that are very user-friendly. And that's a lot of the kind of information that I incorporate because they are really about using the evidence-based research for their nutrition information. So that's usually the route that I go to. But if you have more specifics that I could kind of guide you towards, I'd be happy to do that. So I'm always happy to share that information that way, as well as present to you all in this way. And now I will open it up for questions. So any questions on?
I want to interrupt first by saying thank you. It was excellent. There was a group on the 4th floor that didn't get to see it because the cable went crazy. So we did record it. Yeah, you heard about it. Okay.
Yeah.
But we did record it, so we're gonna figure out a way to show it to them. But I want to thank you again, and I want to say I'm actually going to stop the recording now because that way people will feel free to speak more freely about what could be a sensitive topic. So thank you very much. I'm stopping the recording, but we're going to keep going
Awesome.
until you guys are done with your Q&A. Okay, that's all for now.